When we think about intelligence, our minds usually jump to things like IQ scores or maybe avoiding some huge, obvious mistake. But what if I told you the real story is hidden, that it's actually found in the tiny, everyday habits we barely even notice? I'm talking about the small routines that don't just show how smart you are, they're actively changing your brain, for better or for worse.
So is that really all intelligence is? Just a number on a test? Well, more and more psychologists are saying absolutely not. They argue that true intelligence isn't something you measure in a quiet room with a pencil and paper. It's revealed in how our brains actually respond to the world, moment by moment, in our day-to-day lives. And this, right here, is the core idea we're digging into. It's so much bigger than just a test score. This isn't about looking smart. The source material is crystal clear on this. These little habits, they have the power to physically change your neural pathways. They can either build up your cognitive skills or, well, they can slowly tear them down. All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. We're going to look at three big patterns these habits fall into. First, the cognitive shortcuts our brains absolutely love. Second, the ways we actively dodge real thinking. And third, the blind spots created by our own egos. And then we'll talk about how to start rewiring. First up, cognitive shortcuts and traps. You see, our brains are basically hardwired to save energy. It's a survival thing. But sometimes that easy path, it leads us straight into a trap that makes our thinking lazy and honestly pretty ineffective. Now, what's so fascinating here is how this frames things like superstition or getting sucked into a wild conspiracy theory. It's not just some harmless fun. According to this, it's your brain taking a shortcut. It's confusing a simple coincidence with an actual cause. Instead of doing the hard work of asking for evidence, it's just easier to grab onto the exciting, dramatic story. A truly intelligent mind, though, learns to pause and ask, okay, but where's the proof? And here's another brilliant example of that mental laziness, just blindly following instructions no matter what. That's not discipline, it's a total failure to adapt. There's this fantastic line in the source material that says, lower intelligence follows instructions straight off a cliff. A smart mind, on the other hand, sees when the plan is failing and, actually changes course. And that brings us right to instant gratification. Every single time you choose that quick scroll, that easy snack, or that mindless swipe, you're actually training your brain to avoid effort. It's basically the famous marshmallow test playing out in our daily lives, right? The ability to put up with a little bit of discomfort now for a much bigger, better reward later, that is a massive hallmark of higher cognitive function. Okay, so we've talked about the brain's love for lazy shortcuts. Now let's move on to our second theme, which goes a step further. This next set of habits isn't just about taking the easy road. It's about actively running away from productive and, sometimes difficult thought. So here's a really powerful question for you. If the idea of just sitting in silence with nothing but your own thoughts makes you kind of antsy and you immediately reach for your phone, that could be a sign of what some psychologists call weak mental processing. Intelligent minds actually use that solitude to reflect, to connect ideas, to solve problems. Hiding from it, well, it means you're kind of hiding from yourself. And what about how we talk to each other? If your conversations rarely get past filler, the weather, traffic, weekend plans, it might signal something called a low need for cognition. It's a fancy term, but it just means you prefer to kind of skim the surface instead of putting in the mental effort it takes to have conversations with real substance about big ideas. This quote, man, it says everything. Bragging about how you only got 4 hours of sleep isn't a badge of honor, it's literally a form of self-sabotage. Think about this. After just one night of bad rest, your brain is functioning as if you've had a few drinks. When you neglect sleep, you are directly wrecking your memory, your attention, and your decision-making. You're avoiding the one thing your brain desperately needs to repair itself. All right, our third and final category of habits. And this one might be the trickiest of all, because these habits are rooted in our ego, the very part of us that loves to tell us we're already smart enough, that we don't need to learn anything new, thank you very much. Oh, we've all met this person, right? They interrupt everyone, they dominate the entire conversation, and they have this air of absolute certainty about everything. But as we see here, that outward confidence is often just a mask. It's really just the ego throwing up a smokescreen, using volume to hide a real lack of understanding. It's a classic ego-driven blind spots. And you know what? Psychologists actually have a name for this: the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's that strange cognitive bias where the people who know the absolute least are the most confident that they know the most. Real intelligence, on the other hand, has the humility to say, you know what? I don't know, and then has the curiosity to ask questions and find out.
And this ties directly into how we listen, or, how we don't listen. When we constantly interrupt or just tune out when something sounds complicated, that's often our ego trying to protect itself from the hard mental work of processing a new idea. A smart listener gets it. They understand that literally anyone can be a teacher, and they focus on absorbing information instead of just waiting for their turn to talk.
And then there's this classic phrase, "That's not how we do things." This is the anthem of a rigid mind. This is the ego digging its heels in, rejecting a new idea not because it's a bad idea, but just because it's different. It's a defense mechanism that flat out refuses to adapt, and it keeps the brain locked in old patterns while the entire world just moves on.
So after going through all of that, things might feel a little bleak. But here comes the most important part of this whole thing. None of this is a life sentence. It's not a fixed diagnosis. Every single one of these habits is a choice, which means you have the power to choose differently. You can actively start to rewire your brain for the better. So really, here's the bottom line. You're basically standing at a fork in the road every single day. One path leads to what we could call the stuck brain, the one that repeats the same mistakes and just hides in distraction and consumption. And the other path, that leads to the growing brain, the one that learns, adapts, and intentionally balances comfort with a little bit of a challenge. So in the end, it really all boils down to this one question. This isn't just a bunch of interesting information. It's an invitation for you to take a hard look at your own daily routines. Just seeing the pattern is step one. The real question is, which small habit, which tiny choice are you going to decide to change starting right now?